The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. Hello and welcome to the Mathias Ham Historic Site. My name is Heather Green and I am the Interpretation Program Manager here. And today we will be talking about one of my favorite things to talk about, and that is food and history. It is the holiday season here. If you can see, we've got some decorations out. And one of the things that we like to talk about here, even though we don't see them much elsewhere, are sugar plums. We've all heard of the dance of the sugar plum fairy and the nutcracker. We read The Night Before Christmas. But what is a sugar plum? Turns out, originally, they weren't plums at all. In fact, if you've ever heard the expression, "That's a plum job," or "That's a plum assignment," meaning something delightful and wonderful and sweet, that is where we get sugar plum from. A plum originally meant, and a sugar plum especially, meant it was something so wonderful everyone desired it. And eventually it just became the name of a candy that they already had, called a comfit. And a comfit is a seed or a nut. I'm going to take out some of the seeds that would have been made into comfits. I know you can't really see this, but these are fennel seeds. If you've ever seen one, they're tiny. And in the Middle Ages, they were used as digestive aids. So a very, very patient apothecary, actually, would take these seeds and would coat them in sugar and let them dry, and then coat them in sugar and let them dry, and did this 15, 20 times, and that took a very long time to have anything even resembling something that might be worth eating. But it was a medicine, and so it wasn't something that they just ate all of the time, something that they had to ration. As sugar became more readily available across Europe, they would do this for all seeds and nuts. And if you've ever had a Jordan almond today, that little almond in the candy coating, that's a type of comfit. Actually, an M&M is a type of comfit if you have a peanut inside. So there you go. We still have them. They go by different names. And those were originally called sugar plums. But somewhere along the way, we also know that sugar was a way to preserve foods. So if you've ever seen, we've got, these happen to be green beans rather than sweet. So vinegar was a way to preserve foods. But this one is a jam, and fruits were preserved in sugar. And a very popular recipe in about the 16 to 1700s said that the best way to preserve plums was to cover them in sugar. And so eventually a sugar plum went from this candy-coated seed to a sugar-coated plum. And then eventually, as these things happen, a sugar plum then went from being just a plum to a mixture of dried fruits. And that's what we are making today. Today's sugar plums are a throwback to the Victorian recipe of taking, yes, dried plums, but also dried figs and dried apricots. And it's a very forgiving recipe. I've made them with cranberries and blueberries. You can put in any fruit you want. Just remember, the more fruit you put in, the more sugar plums you have at the end. And it's a very big recipe. Hold it together with some nuts. If you cannot eat nuts, you don't have to put these in. You just might need a little extra powdered sugar to hold things together to keep it dried. If your fruits are too dried, we'll put in a little bit of honey. But our fruits are very, very sweet, and they are not very dry, so we might not need the honey today. And we're not adding any extra sugar because they're already so sweet. So here's the thing. Way back, when they first started making these, they would take their fruits and their choppers, and they would chop into, they would mince these things, and they're very much chopped into very small bits. And you don't want to sit here and watch me chop fruit for 20 minutes because I'd go slow so I didn't cut my fingers. Today we have that wonderful thing the Victorians didn't have, and that was an electric food processor. So last night, I took my fruits and chopped them all up with the nuts in the electric food processor. Promise you, it's much faster and much better for you watching. You don't want to watch all of that. So the recipe calls for a quarter cup. Nope, not a quarter cup. Just about a quarter cup, 4 ounces of each of the dried fruits and 6 ounces of the slivered almonds. You saw how much we have in here? I actually halved that because it's going to make a lot. And now we will season it with spices that we don't consider traditional Christmas spices today, but across Northern Europe, it is very common to have cardamom and anise and fennel in your Christmas breads and cookies. So that is what we will be adding today. And for this, I will refer to my recipe. Now remember, I did say I halved the recipe, so I have to go over and remember that I halved it. Quarter teaspoon each. I very, very conveniently have an 1/8 teaspoon measuring, so we're good. So I have an 1/8 of a teaspoon of cardamom powder. And if you don't like to have the whole seeds in your sugar plums, you are welcome to grind these as well before you add them in. But I do find I like a little bit of texture in my dried fruits. So an 1/8 teaspoon of fennel and an 1/8 teaspoon of anise seed. What else am I forgetting? A pinch of salt. And I don't have that today either, so we're gonna just move on without that. And thankfully this isn't an actual class where you'd be eating the results. This is just for demonstration. And we'll mix those in together. We might need a little honey to hold this in. The wooden spoon is really just for mixing in those spices because this is a recipe that requires hands. Even, doesn't matter where you look it up, you can look it up for 150 years ago, or you can look on modern recipes and all of them will say, just mix that dried fruit and honey with your hands. So we have our gloves. Actually, it's not bad. It does kind of hold together nicely. So we'll add just a little bit. And then, once you've got a mixture that will hold its shape, then you just roll them into tiny little balls, smaller than golf balls. You want them pretty small, so about 1 inch. And they get rolled in either a coarse sugar, or you could use more chopped nuts. You could use chopped coconut, but you can just roll it in that sugar. That's what we have today. And let them dry before, just let them sit, let them kind of set up a bit, as much as overnight, although really only an hour or 2 before they're firm enough to hold their shape when someone picks them up and bites into them. You don't want the fruit going everywhere, but if you are not going to serve them right away, let's say you want to make them today and serve them at a party tomorrow, then you don't have to roll them in sugar. You wait until tomorrow, right before you serve them. So I'll just make a few here. And that's what we have today. We have traditional Victorian sugar plums. And I'd say try them out. They are quite delicious, and best in small doses because they are so very sweet. A lot of our Christmas traditions today come from the Victorian era, and so it makes sense to stop and think about why we celebrate today, how we celebrate, and where did that all come from. The Victorian era, of course, is named for Queen Victoria over in England, and she was crowned in the 1830s and reigned clear up until 1900. So her reign was almost 70 years and only beaten by Queen Elizabeth II. And so she had a lot of change seen during her reign. So anything we label as Victorian honestly covers quite a bit of traditions and fashions and industry. So many things can be covered there. But one thing that we can completely credit her for is the introduction of Christmas trees into the United States mainstream holiday celebrations. Now, obviously, we've been celebrating Christmas as Christians for 2,000 years, but how we've celebrated that has changed dramatically. And originally, the evergreens, the holly, the mistletoe even, and the candles, that all came from pre-Christian traditions of celebrating the winter solstice and the darkest time of year. And the Christian celebrations took those and embraced those as seeing the birth of Jesus, the light of the world. But still, it really wasn't the same as what we would do today. They still burned the Yule log. They still had just greens, but not trees. Except in Germany, the introduction of the Christmas tree into Christmas traditions is credited to the Reformation leader Martin Luther. He liked to decorate the trees with light, again representing Christ as the light of the world. And various traditions have him bringing a tree inside his house to do this. Some of them have it outside, and he just decorated it. But whatever that original first Christmas tree was, it took off and became something very popular throughout Germany. And if you know anything about the British royal family, Queen Victoria married a German. And so when he moved to England, he brought the Christmas tree tradition with him. And the royal family there started decorating a Christmas tree at home. And the weekly newspaper at the time put a lithograph picture of the whole royal family, Queen Victoria, Prince Albert, and all their children around a small but very beautiful and well-lit Christmas tree. And that was a sensation. Anything Queen Victoria did, the British population wanted to do. So they saw the Christmas tree and embraced it. And then, of course, there's us over in the United States, but we still think that Britain's pretty cool. Anything that Queen Victoria wanted to do, the British wanted to do, and the Americans said, hey, that looks fun. And we also want to do that. So the Christmas tree did spread across the United States, even in places where there wasn't a large German population. Because, of course, we have a large German population across the Midwest, and so Christmas trees were definitely here, but it didn't become that widespread mainstream until after the Victorian era.